Then I say we let the gentleman proceed.
Ready?
Sure.
All right, good evening and thank you. My name is Ernest Houle. I'm the Superintendent Director for the Assabet Valley Regional School District. To my left, we have our Assistant Superintendent of Finance and Operations, Mr. Christopher Luoto. And of course, we have our esteemed school committee member from Berlin, this is Lynn Ryan, who does a fantastic job representing the town of Berlin on the committee for usually when I try and think of what the number is years, she just says, yeah, so for many years, right, Lynn?
It must be evaluation time.
Yeah. No, I've been saying that for everybody. So I'm going to share my screen just so we can walk you through the presentation that you have, if that's okay.
Yeah, and the only thing that I would say, Ernie, is just that I guess I don't have to introduce people because with Zoom, you've got our names on the screen, right?
Yes, unless you would like to, it's up to you.
Nah, I think I'm good. Feel free to continue.
All right, awesome. Well, it's always, once again, it's always a pleasure to come before the committee, the Finance Committee, with our annual visit to talk about, our budget for the upcoming fiscal year of 2022. Obviously, we've got the PowerPoint that's going to kind of guide us through so we don't get too far off track and keep us focused. I will say that, this year's particular budget for FY22, as with all of the cities and towns in Massachusetts and other school districts, a little bit more daunting and challenging. And I do know there are several new members of this finance committee that we haven't spoken before in the past, but for Assabet, our regional agreement requires that our budget be tentatively approved in the December timeframe every year. So this year was a little bit more challenging because our FY21 budget, from the state perspective, hadn't gotten finally approved until November. So obviously, we were looking at some things and changes of what needed to happen for this school year, and then how that was going to impact for our FY22. But here's the topics in our presentation this evening: budget goals overview. You can read those through as I move down to the next slide. And if you have questions, feel free to stop us at any point, or if you want to wait till the end, you can do that as well. So, for COVID-19 for this year, here's some of the things that kind of drove our budget development process for FY22. And I will like to report that, luckily we've been in a hybrid 50 model in which 50% of our students have been in the building in person. As you know, Assabet has career and technical programs that don't do well in a remote learning type setup. So we've done our very best to make sure that we can have our students be in person. So they've been in, except for a short time, mid-December to mid-January, they've been in for the majority of the school year. So as the year progressed, we did see a little bit of help through federal action through the CARES and Coronavirus Relief Fund Act. We were originally, they promised a level funding for FY21, which was great. But, we didn't know what the impacts at the time of lost state revenue would look like for FY22. They did obviously report or have early reporting that state revenue came in a little slightly higher than what they had anticipated. So they didn't have to use as much of their rainy day fund. Who knows if that's going to hold true, but our budget, we feel comfortable of what we're going to present to you tonight, that we should be able to handle that. The always, the bouncing ball or the bullseye to try and track down is the regional transportation reimbursement. I will tell you that Lynn has been a staunch advocate of, holding the Commonwealth to that 100% figure, as each year through MASC usually pushes a campaign to make sure and we get the most amount of funding for that. It's never been funded at 100%. That was the whole premise around regionalization. That was kind of the carrot they dangled after having all these schools built, was that they would get 100% reimbursement. and it's never been that. It's been anywhere between 60 to, I think 74% was the highest that it's ever been. So, you know, it's been kind of difficult. And then of course, the decreased spending for this year, based on, you know, our needs of what personal protective equipment and safety protocols and such, of what that would need to look like in order to get our students in the building. So just quickly for the budget overview for FY22, what we have is an operating budget of $23,104,000. It's a $667,000 increase. It's 2.97% increase from our FY21 budget. But interestingly enough, prior to COVID, it was at only a 1% above what the school committee had approved in the February 2020 budget. COVID happened, towns had come to us concerned because all the state revenue had dropped out. The floor had dropped out last, you know, April, May, June. We were asked to kind of, what can you do to shrink your budget for this year? We did that, made the adjustment, minus $435,000 in our FY21. So basically what we're asking is a 1% over the original budget. The capital budget is at $1,922,875. It's the sixth debt service payment for FY22. Overall, for all 7 member communities, it's a $55,000 decrease from FY21. And you will see later on when I hand off the presentation to Chris, that the debt schedule is listed in there and it continues to drop each year. We have a couple of adjustments in our staffing adjustments. We have 2 technical specialists that we're looking to add to help out on our vocational side of the house. I'm not quite sure all of you know, but generally for ASABIT, and actually this bottom note there on the staffing changes with special education positions, ASABIT generally runs anywhere between a 28 and 32% population of students requiring special education services. Those services all vary depending upon the new enrollment of students that come into the building each year as freshmen. So those services can be as simple as accommodations as a 504, or they can be more intensive special education services in which through transition meetings, we then will understand what the student needs. None of those costs get added back to member assessments. Some school districts have an a la carte menu when it comes to special education services. The committee has voted and has stuck with that whatever the member assessment is based on enrollment overall, regardless of the need for special education services, everybody's going to be paying, you know, what the enrollment is based on that town's percentage. So no additional special ed costs are sent to our member towns. So the 2 technical specialists are actually to help out in the technical side, vocational programming side, because in those areas, even though overall the school may be anywhere between 28 to 32%, this year we happen to be at 30%. In our technical areas, we don't discriminate as to what the special ed needs are of the student for the shop that they choose. Therefore, you may see technical programs that have a 70 to 80% population of students that require special ed services. So therefore, this year we're looking to add, and we've seen some numbers go up. We've seen an increase in autism in students coming in, various levels of autism. So we're looking to have some additional help through the technical specialists. The 2 maintenance staff, we've been running lean. We were probably at 16, how long ago was that? What'd you say?
Couple of years.
Yeah, we were at probably 16 maintenance staff and a facilities director. Over the past couple of years, we had a couple of folks leave or resign. We never backfilled those positions. Our current facilities director left the maintenance staff and became the facilities director. We never backfilled his, but I think with COVID and looking at all of the requirements for cleaning and such, we need to add those 2 positions back into the budget. And then lastly, under special ed, we had a number of our staff that were working under the special education grant that we happened to get. And then like with any grants, there's only a certain number of years those folks can stay on that grant before you need to move them into the operational budget. And this is the time in which we need to do that with the special education grant. One important fact I would note that Assabet is not eligible to access any of the circuit breaker money when it comes to special ed populations because we're a regional school district. I'm guessing it's probably because we get regional transportation aid and they can't be giving us all the money. So we generally use the special ed grant. So the grant will be used to help out with additional services that we have. So for the budget details, was this my turn? Yes. Okay, I'm still going. It's been a long day. We have a spending plan that allows for a level service budget, just like the current fiscal year. It meets all the contractual obligations. We are going into the second year of transportation contract. And again, as I mentioned, it was a 1% above the original FY21 budget. The small increase, which is about $20,000, will be happening in our supply budgets for this year. For the past 5, they've been level service funded from FY16, FY20, as you can see. But as you know, with the pandemic and things that have been happening, prices have been going up. If you've been to a Lowe's or a Home Depot, you have a Lowe's in Berlin, you know that a 2x4 that was originally about $2.68 a year ago has gone up to 6 something and some change. So all of those increases in supplies, we're feeling it at our level. I think the additional piece to that is with COVID happening, we generally really are excited about getting involved in community projects with our surrounding member communities. We've done some stuff for Berlin. However, with COVID, we've not been able to go out and do those community projects. So generally when you folks are creating an educational opportunity for us to put our classroom on your land at your project, and you're paying for the supplies for that project. Well, now that we can't do that, we've had to purchase an additional amount of supplies this year for them to be able to do those, replicated type projects here on school grounds. So we're looking forward to being able to do that again. And then the last thing is capital equipment level for FY22. We've kept it level funded from FY16. It's about $35,000. But what we've relied on instead is we've aggressively looked to acquire funds through the governor's workforce skills cabinet. And to date, Assabet has received $2.7 million, which has allowed us to maintain and update our equipment. The last 2 programs that were actually awarded, $281,000 was in our culinary arts and hospitality department. And then just this past year, our health tech department received $351,000. So we're very proud of that ability to be able to access grants. And then this next slide, I'm going to actually turn it over to Chris if folks don't have any questions for me to date. All right, I'm going to turn it over to Chris.
I'll just take that.
Yep.
Good evening, everyone. I'll wrap it up. I know we have 23 slides, but I won't go through every one of them. But so basically Ernie gave the overview of what the FY22 budget looks like. And obviously we're here this evening with the Finance Committee. So how does that impact the town of Berlin, and ultimately how is the assessment calculated? So I am here this evening to, share good news because there's a lot of factors in the assessment this year, but I think you'll be pleased overall. We've had a number of conversations with town administrators throughout all our member municipalities, and who have really asked us to be cautious this year in looking at the budget. And I think once again, we've come in with a very fair budget that does not put a burden on any of our member towns. So we did talk earlier about the capital assessment, but again, there's a capital assessment that's due. Just a reminder, especially for those who are new on the committee at the time, the building project was approved. Our regional agreement says the assessment is per the 3-year enrollment average at the time that project was approved. So for Berlin, you see on this next slide, it's 3.65%. So no matter if your operating share, your enrollment goes up or down year after year, your capital share will remain 3.65% for the life of the bond. This year's capital assessment is $70,185. It's a small savings of $2,007 from the year prior. I'm just gonna, I think our video froze for 1 second, so I'm just gonna try to fix that. Okay. So enrollment, you can see in enrollment, the first line for Berlin, so we have a total of 30 students. This year it's a +1. It's an increase of 3.45%. So we went from 29 to 30 students. And you see in the gray shaded area, Berlin's operating share is 3.37% of the overall operating share. It's gone up slightly, 0.06% overall. So things have remained pretty neutral for the town of Berlin, certainly in comparison to the other member towns and city as well. Here's just a look at our 5-year enrollment average. We continue to trend upward year after year. This is our grades 9 through 12. And again, one of the things to point out here, and this certainly has an impact on our overall budget, you'll see that in the yellow shaded area is our out-of-district tuition students. So while there's 7 members that make up the Assabet Valley Regional School District, we do take students from a number of out-of-district communities. And you can see, especially in comparison from 2016 to 17, we've taken more in-district students and less out-of-district students. So while that's great, and certainly we want to offer to as many seats as possible to our in-district students, it does have an impact on the budget because our second largest revenue source is our out-of-district tuition money, and I'll explain that when we get a little bit further. Our annual percentage increase, again, for FY22 is 2.97, but I just want to point out 2 numbers. I think that Assabet has prided themselves on. Our 5-year average is 3.33%, and our 10-year average is 2.94%. So I think every year we are extremely conservative. Unlike the comprehensive school districts within our member municipalities, our budget historically, and this one included, comes in anywhere between 1 and 2% above net school spending, where our other comprehensive school districts are spending anywhere between 20, 30, 40% above net school spending. So we've always been very conservative. We've brought forward very lean budgets forward to our member communities. The next couple slides are just our budget based on function code. It lists the function code, and it gives an historical outlook from FY18, 19, and 20. And then it shows, again, the $667,000 increase in FY22. In this slide here, our per pupil expenditure, you can see Assabet highlighted in gray. So this is a comparison of all the vocational schools within the Commonwealth and how our per pupil expenditure compares to our counterparts throughout the state. We always say that we're very proud of this number. We never want to be at the top, but we also feel that we never want to be at the bottom. We want to make sure that we provide enough resources for our students to provide a high level career and technical education. And we feel every year we're in the bottom, half or close to the middle. And we feel the budget that we bring forward every year allows us to provide top level education to our students. So how is the assessment calculated? This year is a little bit different, but based on law, we assess based on the statutory method of assessment. So you can either assess based on the statutory method, or if in the regional agreement there's an alternative assessment methodology, you can do that. But since there's nothing in our regional agreement, we use the statutory method of assessment. It basically comes down to 4 areas. Your assessment is based on your minimum local contribution, plus your share of regional transportation minus what we expect for reimbursement. Capital equipment is the 3rd bucket. And the 4th bucket is anything above the minimum. So anything based on us looking at our revenue streams and how we're going to balance the budget, anything that's added to the assessment in order to balance the budget at the end of the year. So here's our revenue sources. Here's our revenue plan for FY22. Again, our largest revenue source is our Chapter 78 at 6.3 million, almost 6.4 million. But you'll see the out-of-district tuition number at 4.337 million. Some years we've come in at 5 million, some years we come in at 5.2 million. But as a result of taking more in-district students, having more in-district applications, we're taking less out-of-district students. So we just don't have that revenue source that we once had for $5 million or 5.2 million. The other key piece to this is the out-of-district tuition rate is set by the commissioner. This past year, as a result of COVID and concerns through municipalities around the Commonwealth, the commissioner actually reduced the out-of-district tuition number. So we actually took in $300,000 less than we had anticipated because that number was reduced by the commissioner. So, however, assessments overall, you'll see in the yellow is at 11,053,133. They haven't gone up that much, and you'll see the impact on Berlin in the next few slides. So really, as I mentioned, there's 4 buckets. The major bucket that dictates the assessment is the minimum local contribution number. So this page is directly from the Department of Ed. Once the House 1 budget is released, you can see again that Berlin's enrollment went from 29 to 30 students plus 1. So your overall, just the minimum local contribution number went up $16,941. So that's driving that's the primary driver. That's what the state says you have to spend on education. So what's different this year for the first time ever as a result of COVID, and I've had a conversation with Margaret in regards to this, is that in the House 1 budget, there is language in there that says members may deem a proportional share of 75% of the regional district's SR2 grant award toward increases in required contribution equal to the municipality's share of the district's total required contribution. So in English, what that means is Assabet is awarded $488,792 for SR2 funds. This isn't funds that the town of Berlin is receiving or the regional school district is receiving in Berlin. This is funds that belong to Assabet, but in the law, in the language currently, and there is still some conversations on how this is going to work out. We even have some updates that we're going to get in a couple of weeks from the Department of Ed. But in the law currently, it states that the municipality may use a portion of our SR2 funds to lower their increase in minimum local contribution. So as I showed you on the prior slide, Berlin's minimum local contribution went up $16,941. Your overall percent of the total required district contribution is 4%, and then 75% of that, you're looking at the $15,541. So you can apply $15,541 to your operating budget if you so choose. And some may ask, well, why don't we just do that? What's the downside? And I'll explain that at the end. But so here's our overall assessments. This is usually what I would have you vote on. Because all our member communities, some have not shared with us what their intent is at this point, we built this slide to show you what the total assessment would be with using the SR2 funds. So you can see again, the first column is required minimum contribution. Then there's a savings of the SR2 funds. Then it's your share of transportation, your share of capital equipment for a total of $463,000. So your overall operating assessment would go down 0.5%. And then in the bottom right table, you'll see that you add in the capital, and then you'll have a total of $533,747. So normally I would say this is what we're asking for your support on this evening. However, after speaking with Margaret and looking at what the Berlin assessment is going to be, and again, this is just a historical outlook. Typically, assessments are tied to enrollment. You can see that in years that you've had a dip in enrollment, your assessment has gone down. In years that your enrollment has increased, you can see that it has an impact, which ultimately impacts your minimum local contribution number as well. But I'll skip to this one. This just shows with SR2, and then here's our last slide of the evening. If you were to choose not to use those SR2 funds, your total combined assessment for FY22 would be $549,288, which would be an increase of $11,203. And if you remember, going back to the minimum local contribution number, that's the big driver for this, which is a 2.08% increase. So in speaking with Margaret, it was recommended not to use SR2 because the 2.08 was a manageable number. And the other piece you need to remember is that the SR2 fund is a one-time only revenue source. So if your enrollment numbers go up next year, you're going to see that much more of an increase if you were to utilize the SR2 funds this time around. And so if you can withstand certainly the 2%, I think, again, just in closing, we have done a tremendous job here year after year to bring forward a budget that meets net school spending or slightly above net school spending, but still providing the resources for our students. We do a very good job, as already mentioned. We've gotten $2.7 million in the last number of years for grants, and we really look for other avenues, and I think we're proud of that. I mean, there are years that it becomes very tight, but I think overall we feel very confident in the budget that we're bringing forward this evening, and we hope and ask for your support, and certainly we're willing to answer any questions that you have.
Can I start?
Go ahead.
So Chris and or Ernie, so my question is, what's the relationship between the out-of-district rate that you're able to charge, or the out-of-district fee, the tuition that you receive, and your Chapter 70 money? How are you guys able to go down $700,000-800,000 in out-of-state or out-of-district tuition and still put forth a budget? It seems like a huge reduction. Do you get more chapters? Do you get more state aid then, or? We did get more state aid than we got last year. Yeah, and ultimately, I mean, the unfortunate thing is the member communities are going to, carry the burden, right? I mean, if you have less revenue, then there's going to be higher assessments. But luckily, I mean, we've been able, like we said, our budget is only 2.97% above what it was last year, and as Ernie mentioned, it's only 1% above what we brought forward and what the school committee voted a year ago for FY21. It was only when COVID hit and we reduced it by $435,000. So we've been, we've managed. We've been lucky to have an additional Chapter 78, and the increase in enrollment, as you saw in one of the prior slides, year after year, provides us more Chapter 78, which certainly helps offset from a revenue standpoint. Okay, so is there also a stabilization fund or something that you guys are able to tap into for that, or
we do not have a stabilization fund? No, we at the end of the year, our extra money flows to E&D, and then typically what we will do is we use our E&D to offset member town assessments year after year.
That's impressive. Thank you.
I have a question to follow right on with that. What is the actual per student out of district tuition?
So it's about $16,400 and change.
And it was previously?
Yeah, it was several $100s higher, and then typically, yeah, it was almost going to be 17,000.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
I can't hear you, Margaret.
Doesn't look like she's muted.
No, she doesn't. Is she? Are you on your other meeting, Margaret, or are you with us? No. Do you have laryngitis?
I won't talk. Try it again.
No.
No.
Right. Well, wait for her. I have two other questions. Do you want to go with those? Right. One of the questions was on the what was it, ESSR? You mentioned that two funding, it could be up to 75%. Is that a 75? It's like you have to apply 75%, or you can do any amount up to 75.
No, so you would be eligible for that $15,000 amount. So it would be that 15,000 up to that $15,000 amount.
Okay, so it could be any amount up to 15,000.
Yep.
Okay. And one other question, which was way back earlier in your slides, just some background on the SPED grant that you had indicated that that was now the SPED teacher would be going on to the operating budget. Can you give some background on what that, I mean, how long that SPED grant was, what, what its motivation was behind it, and that? Because the reason I asked this is the common theme I've seen over many years in the past is we get a grant, we add things in, the grant goes away, and the cost continues onto the operating budget. And of course, we always get the same, the theme of we always try and produce a budget that gives us the same services as previously. So grants have always been a great way, it seems like, where the budgets keep growing. So can you just give me some background on that SPED grant, how long it's been around? I mean, what's motivation of getting it, et cetera?
Yeah, so this is actually an entitlement grant. This is a federal SPED grant. This is an entitlement grant that we get year after year. I'm going on my 9th year here. Historically, we've always put salaries towards it. But as Ernie mentioned, one of the concerns here is that our special education population is increasing year after year. It's extremely high. And as you know, services for special education are increasing. So one of the creative ways that we know that by law, we have to pull those salaries off of the grant. And by doing so, we're not looking to add any more staff. They're currently staff that's been here, but we're pulling them off the grant. And then what we're looking to do is any additional special education costs for services will be paid for out of the grant as opposed to adding additional funds into the operating budget, which would ultimately come back and increase the budget higher than what it is.
Okay, so this grant has been an ongoing thing, this federal grant has been an ongoing thing for many years?
Yep.
And it has been around a steady amount, or has it been fluctuating up, down?
Yeah, I mean, it's based on enrollment, but it's been a similar amount year after year.
And this year it's, you need more special education resources.
Correct.
So it's not necessarily just coming off the grant. I mean, you have the grant and you're using that for other special education resources.
Correct.
Okay.
I can give you an example. So for this year, prior years past, we had students that required special audio devices in order to be able to, understand and hear the teacher clearly. And, years ago when it all first started coming out, it was one of these things where they basically got the teacher a microphone and then it amplified the teacher's voice for everybody, which under special education law doesn't really work like that. You're still not necessarily meeting the needs of the individual. So this year, we've had a number of those in the past, but this year, I believe we had to purchase 20. Yeah, so we went from probably purchasing 2 in the past, in which stay with that child, that student, through ASABIT, and then generally, it's out of date at that point in time. We had to purchase 20 of those this year. So it's an unanticipated cost because our special education admissions process is a blind process in that we do not know through the state regulation whether or not that child needs special education services. What we try to do is when the student applies and is accepted to ASABIT, our special education director and their staff will reach out and try and set up and sit into transition meetings that occur at the eighth grade level. So as the student is transitioning from middle school to high school, if we're part of that transition meeting, then we can know what to potentially anticipate for that student coming into ASABIT. Some school districts don't really like it that we're there sometimes and don't allow it because they feel as though they could potentially be on the hook if ASABIT's suggestions for an IEP, individual education plan for that student, would be legally binding. However, unless that student physically walks through our door on August 31st, we're not considered the LEA or the school district. So the sending school, in this case, Berlin-Boylston, would not be on the hook to provide what we would come up with for a transition plan for an IEP, because they're two totally different educational delivery models. So really, it's a new and exciting challenge every year to see, potentially how the special education associated costs are going to increase. But I will say, though, I think our staff does an outstanding job in the 4 years that the students are here with us. We have a very high graduation rate and then attendance rate for our students that are here. They're engaged, and they're going out to be successful and productive citizens in the global economy. And so the other comment I'll just make too is, the interesting thing Chris mentioned with and we've kind of talked about this the past several years, at least when I started 2015, we've seen our in-district applications growing. We're not quite sure if last year they grew a little bit more than we expected because of COVID, and that parents were probably thinking, you know what, Assabet's going to try and figure out a way to get their kids in person because of their educational delivery model that they have. Does not work very well remotely, maybe for a couple of programs, but not for automotive or welding or carpentry. You just can't do that remotely. So we had seen a little bit of an increase in interest, but when I started, we weren't getting probably 175 applications from in-district populations to fill a 275 a slot allotment for students coming in. We've increased our enrollment to 300 per class size for freshmen coming in, but now we're getting anywhere between 400 and 600 applications. And usually from our in-district, it's close to almost 400. So we've seen that number grow exponentially.
Okay, any other questions? Thanks.
Thank you.
Hear me?
Yes.
You can?
Woo.
Oh, now I forgot what I was going to ask. No, I'm only kidding.
Ain't it always the way?
No, I just wanted to add something to what Chris talked about with the ESSER funds. Yes, the 2.08% is, I felt was manageable, but I just want to be clear. It was the one-time aspect of that funding that was the scary part. So that's where I truly felt, and I expressed this to Chris, I truly felt that where it was only 2.8%, the ESSER funds are one-time funds, we'd end up seeing that increase next year in addition to any other increase we're going to see with enrollment next year. I just thought it would be in our best interest to leave the ESSER funds alone and not have them offset our minimum local contributions. So I just wanted to make that clear. Thank you.
Is part of the concern of that next year that it would just be the selling of the higher percentage? Because it's not so much that we'd be looking at that we need the funds to meet our budget. I mean, it's not like we are that short, but at the same time, I know obviously it would look bad in the following year percentage wise. Is it more of the concern of that being a spike percentage jump to the public's eyes, even though it'd be a case that we weren't that we were leveraging funds that obviously will be spent elsewhere that would be used to offset the tax base?
I think that's a good question. It may be not a question for me, but I saw it as deferring the inevitable. I saw it as deferring this year's cost to next year and adding it to next year's cost. And frankly, I know the Finance Committee has every right to weigh in on this. And my thought was, why defer this year's cost to next year? I mean, we could see an increase of 3 students next year and have to have, and have to bear that cost burden in addition to what we would have paid this year for the minimum local contribution. So that was just my perspective.
Yeah, Scott, I have two comments on that. One is I wouldn't want to get up at town meeting and try to explain any of this ESSER stuff. And then secondly, I do think it's better for us to have incremental changes, smaller incremental. I think it just doesn't jump off the page when somebody's looking at the budget. So,
I'm still concerned about what next year is going to look like. I have a feeling we're going to be in worse shape next year than this year, and at 2%. I mean that's like a doable number. I mean, to me, because we may be wanting those funds next year, and if we use them this year, we're not going to have them. And I'm really, really concerned about next year. I know we're only talking this year, but boy, I'm really concerned. So congratulations on a great budget, Guy. And Guy Sawyer's doing awesome, and I owe it all to you. So thank you so much.
Does anyone have anything else for these fine gentlemen?
No.
Stan, I got a sort of a big picture question, and it might not be right for Ernie and Chris here, but I listened into the Berlin-Boylston, the school district conversation last night. And there was a little conversation on their end about, well, we're never sure how many students are going to be going to Assabet, and how do they fit together? It was something that was, and it may be a question that nobody here can answer, but if the town is supporting a student in one school, you're not supporting it in the other. Is that how it works, basically? Or
Yeah, pretty much. So, just to kind of give you folks kind of a brief history of how it generally works. I will say that the Finance Committee has always been very supportive of Assabet in encouraging students to come and attend. Back when the school district the history of the school district basically was created and formed, all of the member towns decided that in order to offer a plethora of high quality career and technical programming, which would be astronomical for you to run in your own sending school, that they could have a joint shared cost in order to be able to fund something with state of the art in which Assabet is currently today. The difficult part is that thought process from the initial inception of the school district, unfortunately, has come to money follows kids. So that's, if you kind of whittle everything off, it's basically money follows the student. So yes, if students leave their sending school district and then end up coming to Assabet, then that would be a drop in their foundation enrollment. So one of the things that is interesting is that all students have the opportunity to find out about vocational opportunities, especially if they're a member of the school district. And yet when Assabet goes to the middle school to do presentation day, generally what happens is a date gets picked. They let the students and the families know that we're going to be in the cafeteria on a specific day. There's a little room, I guess. I've never personally been to the school, so I couldn't tell you where the room is, but it's right off the cafeteria. And then generally what happens is while the students are at lunch, if they're interested in learning about Assabet, they make one announcement, and then any student would go in there, they'd eat their lunch while the presentation is happening. In many other school districts, the entire 8th grade population goes in and sees a 45-minute presentation. It does count for career awareness for the student. It does count as time on learning through the Department of Ed. So really, depending upon that day, you might see one student in that room, or you might see 7 or 8. Generally, I think what we've seen historically from towns is that if their family has a history with Assabet, generally the further generations then follow in the footsteps of family members, and then they will go. Other potential factors are if a student has a less than pleasant experience or something happens and they want to try a new environment to get a fresh start, that's another opportunity in which parents will take to have their students go to Assabet. as well. So yeah, it depends, really depends on the student and their desire to come. You know, this type of education is not for everybody, even if it's, you know, a very well-rounded and all straight A type student, or even a student that struggles in school. Some students just can't fit to the schedule that we have because we have a week about system. You know, 1 week they're in their academic area and they study their academics for the week, and then the following week they're in their technical field. But generally during their technical field, they may still have academic homework. And the same is true during their academic week. They may have related technical theory that they have to do. So it's almost like I call it a pre-college type experience where they leave their sending school, go to a whole nother campus, meet a bunch of different other people, and then they have a schedule of classes in which they need to really be able to manage in order to be able to get the work done and keep up. And there's some long range planning and things of that nature. So it depends on the individual, but basically in a nutshell, it's money follows students.
If I may, I also think that when you are involved with 2 regional high schools, if you have an extra, quote, extra student going to Assabet, your percentage of Assabet increases, but at the same time, in the regional homeschool, it decreases.
Yeah,
So
that,
you're,
yeah. Mhm. That was the essence of my question, Lynn, and I don't know if it's apples to apples, and maybe it's not that big of a difference. I don't
it
know.
depends upon pure pupil costs, et cetera.
Yeah.
You do get extra Chapter 70 money when kids go to Assabet because it's a 2-for-1. But
right.
that, you know, it is a balance. And folks, I would hate to see you in any way constrain kids from going to Assabet, because I think there's a lot of kids in Berlin that need this type of education.
Yeah, I know, Lynn, that wasn't I was just wanting to understand. I'm not, you know, I don't have a,
Oh, I know. But that's why I'm saying, you know, you're gaining one on one side and you're losing one on the other side. But there is a difference between the amount of money you're paying for a student here and paying for a student there, and a difference in the Chapter 70 that you're getting here and you're getting there.
yeah, that Chapter 70 comment is certainly helpful to understand that. Yeah.
The other thing I'll just mention real quick, which luckily you folks don't have any of this, but if you were not a member, or even actually if you had a student that was a member of Assabet that decided they wanted to enroll in agricultural education, there's only 3 of those in the state, and they're nowhere close to Assabet. So that point, you'd be on the hook to have to transport them to either Smith Agricultural out in the western part of the state, Essex Agricultural up in the northern part, or Bristol Aggie, which is down in the south. And usually transportation costs are in the $25,000 range, and then the cost of a tuition is close to 30. So luckily, you know, the students are close, and it keeps the cost down, and the transportation is included in that. So So the thing I'll mention is out-of-district students' transportation costs are paid separately by that sending school district. So that is not included in the same tuition assessment that you folks get as an additional cost for transportation.
Yeah. Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, well, we do have said school coming up, so we should probably wrap this up, folks, if everyone's all set.
Oh, that's right. I forgot.
Oh, yeah.
Thank
I'm
you.
set. I'm set, Stan. Yeah.
Great seeing you, Ernie and Chris. Thank you.
Hi, guys. Thanks for a great
Thank you very much.
presentation.
Thanks, Ernie. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you. We miss
Bye,
coming
Lynn.
in, seeing all the wildlife pictures when we come into the town hall. I get to see them at least once a year, so it's good to get my update.
All
Take
right,
care.
thank you both.
Bye, guys.
Okay, and I will promote. Lynn, would you like to stay?
I'd like to stay.
I'm gonna promote Jeff and Bob now. Alrighty.
Well, good evening, gentlemen. Sorry to keep you waiting. Aspet was very long-winded. What can I say?
Well, wait till I get a hold of Ernie. I got a meeting with him I got a meeting with him on Friday morning, so wait till I see him.
Hi, Jeff. Hi, Bob.
Hi, how are you?
Hi, trying to get the video going here. There we go.
There he is.
Good evening.
So what's going on, guys?
Not much. Thank you for having us tonight. We hope we can sort of shed some light in a shorter time than the Assabet Valley folks did. And
That was your challenge. That's why we arranged it this way, was just to set the bar. A little friendly competition.
I'll let you lead, Jeff, you lead off. Let me know when you want me to jump in.
Sure, okay. Bob, are you going to share your screen?
Yeah, so I don't think I'll be able to see myself. So if I'm looking at my screen and not, but here we go. Everybody see the presentation?
Yep.
Yeah, thanks, Bob. Go ahead, you go to the next one, Bob. All right, good, thank you. So first thing to talk about is our budget goals. We have a 5-year plan, and usually that's what drives what we spend each year and what we decide on. And so this year, because of COVID, we've sort of curtailed that. We were able to provide quite a bit of resources for students, but Bob and I had been talking over the last couple of years about a level funded budget, and we thought, these towns have been really great to us over the last few years since I've been here. So we thought this would be the year that we would work on a level funded budget. And so we think we found something that you'll be happy with. The target assessment increases were between 2.5% and 3%. That's what we were shooting for. We were able to do that and still provide the needed resources for our students, especially with this COVID year. We didn't know from day to day really what to expect. Next slide, Bob. So we'll present this in three parts: a summary of the revisions of the preliminary budget. So you can see the changes we've made, and then the revised building level budget, and then some revenue budgets and local minimum local contributions and some assessment data. Go ahead, Bob. We did make some assumptions and risk while we were going through this budget. The first one was that we assumed that we will be in a full and learning mode for the school year 21-22. I don't suspect it'll be a good career move on my part if we're not. We actually plan on being full in by certainly by the spring. And so that's what we're shooting for. It does come with some challenges, and we do anticipate most of those challenges coming in the form of instruction and assessment issues. We have been in a remote or hybrid mode for a long time. We anticipated what is referred to now as a COVID slide, which in a lot of ways will echo what happens during the summertime. We have some assessment data that shows it may not be as great, but still we anticipate needing to bring in some part-time tutors and possibly some extra instructional materials and things to get our students back to where they ought to be, in addition to some social emotional concerns that we have for our students. We're hoping to pay for much of that. If you look down on bullet point 4 with the SR2 funds, they have a broad use, but unlike SR1, which really focused on preparing the schools for COVID and then responding to COVID if something happened. The SR2 funds really addresses learning loss, prepping the school for reopening, testing, all of the things that we're really going to need to find out, one, where the students are, and two, what we're going to do about it. So we caught the end of the Assabet, we caught the end of the Assabet presentation. And so we're hoping you feel the same way about our SR2 funds as you do about theirs. Because we do really see that there's going to be a need for that this year. Bob, do you want to cover 2 and 3 and then get into some of the details?
Sure.
Thank
So
you.
the second assumption we've made is that we're going to be able to successfully refinance the Tohoto building bond. This is the original bond when the building was built around 2010-11. It has a provision where we can call the bond and refinance the debt with interest rates very low. We're going to take advantage of that. I've gotten some modeling done by our bond counsel that I've used to factor into some of the savings in our capital budget that I'll talk about a little bit later. The other assumption we have is that we're going to be modifying our healthcare plan design to move to a deductible healthcare plan. The administration has proposed that to the Insurance Advisory Committee. It's subject to union and school committee approval. It is a core part of our budget and kind of delivering the year-over-year increases that we've projected. And we've had conversations with the union and our health insurer to look at some plans. We've also, at the same time as this, looked at rolling out a flexible spending plan to minimize the impact to employees that would be employee funded, but really wouldn't cost the district much other than an administrative fee. So it kind of mutes the impact of these deductibles. These are small deductibles. It's a 300 individual and 900 family per year deductible. We currently don't have deductibles. So I think the union and the Insurance Advisory Committee certainly have spoken. I'm not saying they're speaking for the union as a whole, but they're representing them. But the Insurance Advisory Committee, I think, understood that deductible plans are the most common plans in the marketplace now. It's in companies in general, but it's also now the case in public education. So what I have here, and I won't talk about the middle column since we're really looking at items impacting Berlin, which is the Berlin Memorial column, and the Tohoto column. The top line shows our preliminary budget that we presented in December. The next line is a budget transfer, and what this reflects is a shift of items that were previously budgeted in the town. We had paraprofessionals. And these are elementary school staff that includes paraprofessionals, custodial staff, and food service staff. It does not include teachers. Those are mass teachers retirement, and that's a self-funded program. So these costs didn't transfer right away when we regionalized. Worcester Regional, I guess, updates their modeling on their modeling is based on censuses they do every 2 years. So this transitioned for the first time. It'll transition for the first time in FY22. So we're reflecting this as a budget transfer. And there'll be some corresponding reduction in the towns, but you'll also see other impacts affecting your assessment. The other adjustments we made, the first line shows the financial impact of changing the healthcare plan design, which is significant. It's kind of the largest reduction here. We looked at that. We felt like that was something that was a little bit more equitable than looking at salaries, because the healthcare plan design affects all employee categories. It affects the administration, teachers, paraprofessionals, cafeteria, custodians, anybody who's part of a plan, instead of potentially having to negotiate different salary rates, or, different timing of union contracts would be much more hard to equitably do that. we also feel like that this reflects, this makes the most sense. We feel like as a district, pay-wise, we're where we are is appropriate, but that our healthcare plan may be a little bit rich. The next line is a reduction in one enrollment. That we get updates periodically on who's enrolled in the plan, so we made that change since the preliminary budget. We've had some adjustments to pay, notices of retirements, and I don't want to get into specific people, but there are some retirements that we anticipate having replacement cost savings for that we've factored into our open hearing budget. The Worcester Regional Retirement piece on Tohoto, initially we had an estimate and we revised that based on their numbers when they published them in January. We had some small reductions to maintenance utilities at Tohoto based on usage estimates. And in the last item, special ed, we have a likely residential placement. We've seen an uptick in, when we look at the Tohoto budget, you'll see it. We've seen an uptick in special education costs. We've have a likely residential placement, but it's not 100% certain. We've reduced our estimate for that by $55,000 in terms of the cost. There's a chance we'll need to pay more than we've budgeted, but we feel like we can offset that through the use of, through a couple methods, potentially through the use of a special ed IDA grant or the use of circuit breaker funds, or if we can identify any savings at the end of this year, we're legally permitted to prepay a portion of tuition. So some combination of that, we feel like we can, we have a little bit of a blip next year that we can offset some of it by budgeting a little bit less. So in total, we have a $37,000 reduction at Berlin from what we initially proposed, and a $202,000, using round numbers, the Tohoto middle school budget. All right, the next slides are the a look at it from a building perspective. The FY22 budget, the blue figures reflect what we're comparing. I've shown for transparency what the FY21 budget was that was presented and approved. The budget transfer for Worcester Regional Retirement was added that to arrive at a restated FY21 budget of $3,864,996, and you can see we've come in $93,500, about 2.4% above FY21's restated budget. The main drivers for that are, I mentioned previously, we've seen an increase in special education needs. Those two FTEs are related to the preschool, incoming students. In order to meet their needs and what we've agreed to in the IEP, we're going to require 2 FTEs for paraprofessional for one-to-one supports for these students. That accounts for $58,000 of the increase. Teacher union salaries are, that includes all the teachers union positions, not just the classroom teachers, school psychologist, nurse, special ed teachers. That's $53,000 increase. That's all contractual. That's steps in lane increases, as well as a 2% increase year over year. We've added we've converted an elementary special ed coordinator position from half-time to full-time. This is a position that we previously had full-time. We've tried to save some money in the past couple of years, but we've seen significant needs across both elementary schools. This position is shared between the Boylston Elementary School and the Berlin Elementary School, and they essentially get about a little bit more than 1 day a week for each school. We've put this off a bit and we felt like we couldn't wait anymore, particularly with an increased number of students identified with needs. And so we're converting it to a full-time position next year. The increases are offset by a reduction in health insurance costs, which is mainly related to lower than anticipated enrollment And last summer we had a custodian retire, and we outsourced the position, and we're going to save $9,000 from that. And that's an evening position. The capital request, the first item is deliberately listed as it is as a placeholder. We have a facilities assessment project that's going on right now. That was a capital item the town approved last year. We've hired a consultant, Habib and Associates, to take a look at all the building components, building envelope, the different systems, electrical, plumbing, et cetera, and give us a roadmap for capital needs over the next 10 to 15 years. We anticipate there could be something that they recommend be done next year. We don't know what that would be. So our thought at this point was to leave it as a placeholder and see. We're hoping to get some data from them in time or before town meeting so we can make this more specific. The second item is an electronic sign at the school entrance. The principal wanted me to share that this is something that's not just for the school. It can have community use if there's messages that police, fire, youth sports want to put on there. The principal said he kind of, he thinks the town kind of used the Berlin Memorial as a hub that people access and see and drive by. So he wanted to share that that's something that wouldn't necessarily just be for the benefit of the school. That includes the cost of connecting electric service to the school. And then asphalt repairs and restriping of the parking lot, something we had in the budget last year. We deferred a year and we're bringing forward this year. I'm going to skip over the Boylston Elementary slides and move on to Tohoto. At Tohoto, we have a $396,000 increase, 4.3%. The largest driver there is the teachers' union salary increases. And the second largest is their special ed out of district tuitions. Again, this is largely driven by anticipated residential placement. We do see the special ed out of district costs, ebb and flow. This is a year where, we had a reduction a couple of years ago. This is a year where it's headed in the other direction. The other piece that's associated with that is the transportation for that out of district placement. Overall, our transportation costs for special ed are projected to increase by $80,000. The medical therapeutic service expenses is also primarily rated to special ed students, is projected to increase by 16. And we have a $55,000 reduction in health insurance costs, primarily based on slightly lower enrollment. Tohonto's capital, you can see the figure there. It's just under 1.6 million. It's a reduction of about 126,000 from last year. Assumes we're going to be able to successfully refinance the Tohoto building project. I fully expect that we will. We're working with bond counsel and our district treasurer. Our interest rate assumption is 0.5% above current market conditions. We didn't want to come in and have to increase the number later, and there is some risk. This goes out to the bond market in April, so there's about a month and a half of interest rate risk. Once we get the actual number, we can revise the budget if it's lower. As a sense of what it could be, I mean, I think the analysis, I asked for two sets of analysis. One was based on current rates, one was 0.5% above current rates. It'd be probably about another $40,000 reduction if we get the current rates right now when we go out and get the bond sale. So there is some potential that could decrease. Next, we're going to take a look at the district-wide and town summaries. This really recaps the previous slides we looked at in terms of what the increase was for each school, 2.4% for Berlin Memorial, 4.3% for Tohoto. And again, this is the spending budget, not the assessment. this is specifically the operating budget. I am gonna, in the interest of time, skip some slides that I don't think are that relevant, that we've traditionally shared with the school committee. This one I just wanted to highlight. I don't think is a significant concern for the town of Berlin, really. I would just note that we have, excuse me, back one. The circled items just show that we're drawing down the revolving fund balances a bit right now. We're doing this, we're aware we're doing it. We feel like we have relatively healthy balances in our revolving funds, but we do feel like we need to pay attention to it and make sure we plan to not rely on overspending what we're taking in a revolving fund versus what we're spending. If you look at the Berlin school choice, there's a very healthy amount of funding there. In some ways, it serves as a stabilization fund for this, or something that comes up in the school, or if we have a potential year with a significant increase, you'd have the ability to access those funds and apply them towards the operating budget. School lunch is taking quite a hit this year because we have, the same amount of staff really that, we reduced it by one person, 1.5 people, but it's the same amount of staff, but half the students, we're also having to purchase containers, disposable containers to serve the food in. So we're spending nearly the same amount, but taking in less revenue with half the students in the school. They're doing a great job with remote meals. We've had a very large increase in meal participation. And I will just say, since this is a public meeting, just as a reminder to any families, the meals, all school meals are free. So just encourage people, if they have food supply concerns or access to food, that we have free meals available for any students of school age, whether they attend our schools or not. The next one is just a split of the budget by revolving fund and general fund. I don't think this year it's particularly informative. We just shows what portion of our spending overall is coming from the general fund and revolving funds. From a revenue perspective, we have stable but flat state aid. The Student Opportunity Act, you may have heard or read about, has had very minimal impact to Berlin-Boylston on its Chapter 70 funding. Similar to many communities, we do not have a high percentage of low income or English language learners, and districts that had higher proportions of those students and families saw larger increases in Chapter 70. And so see on the next slide, our revenues are essentially flat. This is Tohonto's revenues, and basically we're projecting really not hardly any increase. I'm sorry, this is total district-wide revenues. I shouldn't have said Tohonto. Just informational on resident enrollment. So part of your share of Tohonto is driven by the relative student populations. This is the first year in a while where we've seen a little bit of a shift of more Berlin students and a slight drop in Boylston students. And that is affecting the assessment. Berlin's share of the assessments a little bit, has a little bit higher of a percentage increase than Boylston this year. At a high level, this is how the assessments are for the town of Boylston. And you can see that we are, bear with me, I'm sorry, I'm trying to move the gallery here so I can see the slide. Berlin Memorial, so these are assessments, these are expenses net of revenues, Chapter 70. Berlin Memorial has a 2.5% increase. Again, this is versus the restated assessment for FY21 for Berlin Memorial. Tohonto is a 6.6% increase. there is part of the reason why that is, there is a little bit of a shift to the Chapter 70 money gets split amongst the high school and the elementary schools, and both towns have a little bit more of a proportion of its students going to the elementary schools relative to its total student population versus the high schools. So there's a little bit of a shift of Chapter 70 money in our budget from the Tohoto to the elementary schools, which is impacting Tohonto's overall increase. The Berlin Memorial Capital is down, and again, the Tohoto Capital is down significantly. Overall, we come out at an assessment increase of 2.6%. We've, in initial conversations we've had with the towns, both towns gave us guidance. We're looking for 2.5, ideally, or preferably, maybe 3%. So what we've shown down below, we definitely use this just to kind of track where we were versus targets. So we're close to the 2.5%. We're 7,325, just above that. And if we have favorable results of our bond proceeds, that it might get reduced, that might account for 7,000 in reductions. And we're well under the 3% target by 25,000. This is the Boylston vocational tuition, so I'm going to skip over this one. They're a little bit different. We give them guidance for their budget on vocational tuition because they're not a member, unlike Berlin. So these are just the tuitions they pay. So a couple other things we wanted to make you aware of. Maya is our healthcare insurer for health insurance. They announced a 1-month premium holiday in FY22, which means that the district and staff are not going to need to pay premiums for 1 month. So that's a 1/12 savings on our healthcare budget. What we're proposing to do is to do a budget neutral reallocation of these funds to put it towards funding special ed reserve fund with 50,000 and the OPEB trust fund. The remainder, or approximately 110,000, might be a little bit more than that. We haven't reflected that yet. We want to ratify the healthcare plan design changes first to confirm the amount available. I also wanted to just, you probably, I think the town has Maya as well. We felt that it would be not a good idea to budget a savings because the following year we're essentially going to start off with an 8.25 or an 8.33% increase in healthcare before we even get our new rates. So we felt like we wanted to, at the same time, we didn't want to just budget more than we were going to spend. So we thought that we'd identify some one-time uses for these funds and apply them there. Special Ed Reserve Fund, we have established, both towns approved it a couple of years ago, but we haven't funded it. And the OPEB Trust Fund is less than 1% funded. This will kind of help us hopefully make some progress towards regularly contributing to the fund. The other thing we wanted to be transparent about was, and you likely already know this, but there's an SR2 grant. The Berlin Boylston amount is $127,408. It provides towns the opportunity to apply 75% of it to fulfill part of the minimum local contributions. In essence, what that would do is it would supplant part of the assessment. We would, if we did that, just for the sake of round numbers, it's about 100,000 out of that 127 that would be able to be applied to the assessments. About 66% of that would be Boylston's and about 33% would be Berlin's. So, it's about 33,000 for Berlin. It would result in an increase to your assessment the following year equal to that amount because our core operating budget would be supported by those funds. The other consideration is that we would like to use those funds. We feel that we are going to have supplemental needs. We're aggressive in identifying identifying a budget that would meet town requested increase levels. But we anticipate there's things that we're going to need to do that are not typically funded by our budget, whether it be tutors, additional technology, social emotional supports. So that would be our request. And I think that's all we had. Hopefully that, you know, if you have any questions, we'd certainly be happy to address them.
I guess I would start, Bob. So what's the bottom line increase at Tohono then? Not capital, but operating?
The budget or the assessment?
I guess the budget, the impact on the budget.
Yeah. So the spending budget increase is 4.3%. And about half of that is the special ed tuition and transportation.
Right.
Otherwise would be around 2%. And from an assessment perspective, it's higher because there's less Chapter 70 money. It's getting more directed to the elementary schools. So it's 6.6% on an assessment level. I'll go back to that slide.
Yeah.
So
I guess I don't understand what the bottom section is then. So what's if we say that we have a targeted increase of either two, so those are just two different scenarios, 2.5% and 3%?
yeah, that's basically to provide some, just to show how far we are from the 2.5% and 3%. So we came in at 2.
At which one, or both, or is that combined, or?
No, I'm showing them separately. So like, you know, we wanted to be able to show, you know, the range was 2.5 to 3. We're a little bit above 2.5, and we're about, well, we're 25,952 under 3%. So we're just showing them separately.
Right, I'm sorry, I meant, is that for BMS, or is that for Tohono, or is that for both?
This is for in total assessments
In
to
total.
the town. Yeah.
Okay.
That's adding up the Berlin operating, Tohoto operating, Berlin capital, and Tohoto capital. You know, I'm hopeful that there's a bit more of a decrease on the Tohoto bond, but we legally can't overspend, and I didn't want to be in a position where we have to ask for an increase right on the town floor of town meeting. But if I get an updated number, I can certainly share it, and we can look at revising it downward.
So we're basically hoping to offset some of the actual school assessment with capital savings. I mean, it's basically what it's boiling down to, right? I mean, because the school assessment at Tohono is up 6%. We're saying the overall is just a little bit over 2.5, and that's because we're saving it on the capital side, right?
That's right. That's right. We, yeah, the Tohoto bond is a significant help to our budget this year.
Right.
Over 10 years, we think we're going to save about $1.2 million to $1.5 million. So it's a year that we needed it.
So so going forward though, is that, I mean, I guess it would continue to save year over year, as opposed, it's not a one-time thing, because it's
Correct.
continually lowers.
Yeah, it's a new baseline.
So, right, but so if it's a new baseline, that means next year we wouldn't see that percentage savings, and we could potentially be seeing similar percentage increases in operating expenses, which are not going to be offset by, it's almost like using one-time savings to pay for ongoing operating, or am I misreading that?
But I know what you're saying, but I think that we don't anticipate that we'd have an incremental 200,000 plus increase in special education expenses. I mean, it's possible it decreases, maybe it's level, but like the special ed costs 2 years ago, or last year or 2 years ago, went down by 300,000 in 1 year. We had some
Okay.
as students age out, either they graduate in 12th grade or they age out at the age of 22, they come off the district's financial responsibility. And so, I think that, a level service budget, 4.3, was a little bit high for Tohoto, but it was, without the increased special ed, if we had more of the same amount of students, that it outplaced, the same amount of students outplaced and transported, we would have been looking at, instead of 4.3, more like 2.1% or 2%. At
Yeah.
Tohoto.
Okay. Thank you. That's it from me.
I have a question on going back to your healthcare plan modifications. Is this done during mid contract negotiations with the teachers, or is this something that you have contract negotiations going on with that right now?
No, it's not part of contract negotiations.
Okay.
In order to change the percentage, we pay 75%. That has to be done through contract negotiations. This is something that plan design can be done by communicating with the Insurance Advisory Committee, which we didn't have until this past few months ago. We're hopeful to, we had conversations a couple of years ago about moving to a deductible plan, and we deferred them. Part of it was the pandemic. Part of it was we made some other changes where there was higher co-payments. So this is something that I think they've heard of and been aware of. We've made the proposal. We feel like we still have a very good plan. We had committed to them to meet with the Insurance Advisory Committee and make our proposal that way, and not go through the legal process. There's I think a chapter 32, I don't know what section it is, section 21 maybe. But there's a legal process where we can unilaterally make plan design changes and have to follow a certain amount of steps. And we didn't feel like that was going to be productive to maintaining a good relationship with our teachers. There is a way to do it without going through the Insurance Advisory Committee, but we felt like this was the best way to do it and explain what we're doing and why, and also try to mitigate it by offering a flexible spending plan. So if we do make this change, they will be paying deductibles, but they'll also be paying lower premiums than they otherwise would. And they'll get the tax savings of a flexible spending plan for medical expenses and pharmaceuticals. So the impact to the individual is fairly muted, but the impact to the district is a significant benefit.
Okay, thanks.
Say, Bob, I was curious, I think it's way back, maybe slide 5. There was the one that dealt with the Worcester Regional retirement details and so on. Is that? Yeah, that one. Yeah, one thing that stuck out for me was that Boylston had a retiree health care and Berlin didn't. And I assume these are just historic realities of the two towns, but how many individuals are we talking about? What these costs on the Worcester Regional Retirement, or that particularly that retiree healthcare? How many individuals are we talking about that represented in these costs or savings?
So a couple questions you posed. I'll kind of answer them in the order I process them.
Okay.
So the retiree healthcare for Boylston, there are dollars in the Berlin budget, but this is changes from a preliminary budget. So we had noticed, we had 3 employees notify us between our preliminary budget and our open hearing that they were going to retire.
Mm-hmm.
So we have, so we factored in those costs into the retiree healthcare. At the same time, we anticipate we're going to save money. So you see the teacher staff pay adjustments in Boylston is lower. We anticipate we're going to hire people at a lower pay than the retiring teachers, which mostly offsets the retiree healthcare. But the number of people, so the retiree healthcare is available to all staff.
Okay.
The Worcester Regional well, all staff that are benefits eligible, having been with the district 10 years, and they have to be pension eligible. The Worcester Regional Assessment is for, I don't have the exact numbers, but I can tell you for Berlin Memorial, it's about 8 paraprofessionals, 1 custodian, because the night custodian was an outsourced position, 2 food service workers. You know, they all potentially would need to get vested as well. So there's a possibility that that they don't. But so those are the staff that would be related to that. The teachers, again, are part of MTRS.
Mhm.
So that's a self-funded plan.
Yeah, that aspect with the teachers, that was clear from the conversation and so on. Yeah, that's very helpful. Thank you, Bob.
So it's not a ton of employees, but I think the Worcester Regional Retirement System is slightly underfunded, and they're, you know, you probably see that we have to make catch-up contributions to help fund it. So
Understood. Yeah, thank you.
Good question.
Yes.
I'm
Okay.
sorry, go ahead.
Okay, Bob, I have a question regarding the ESSER funds. How likely is it that any of the ESSER funded costs will be rolled into the FY23 budget? Are they just really costs due to COVID that will go away, or do you expect them to roll into the FY23 budget?
What, FY22, FY23?
Yeah, the year.
I think we're looking to do one-time things. Like
Okay.
I wouldn't, I mean, generally, the guidance that I provide to the principals and the administrative team and Jeff and I have talked about is let's not try to hire a position unless it's a critical need that we can't pay for otherwise. Let's not try to hire a position out of the grant. Let's try to pay for one-time costs out of the grant.
Okay.
The other problem with putting positions in grants is you have to pay a MTRS tax of 9%.
Margaret, we won't put any money in. There won't be any money
Okay.
in FY23.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the short answer. There'll be nothing.
Okay, thank you.
Right? Yeah.
Thank you, that's helpful.
Anyone else?
Well, I think we put them to sleep.
Let's go. Let's go back to the gala review. We'll see. We can check. Hold on.
Been a long day for the school
Yeah.
nurse here.
All right. Well, thank you, gentlemen. I appreciate it. Oh, sorry, Janet.
No, it's
Sorry.
okay.
Who's
Sure
throwing a
Jess
curve?
knows. I said Desi is throwing us all a curve.
They sure are. Well, that's okay.
Yeah.
We'll just wait. We'll just ignore it today. It'll change tomorrow.
Oh, like the New England weather.
True,
Yeah.
so true.
So,
Thank you.
All right, thanks.
Bye, guys. Have a good night.
Yeah,
thank you.
thank you very
you
much.
both.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, take care.
Thank you both.
All right. Well, my head's spinning from school numbers. That's for sure.
So you, just so you all know, I uploaded the latest spreadsheet with the school numbers in, so intergovernmental expenditures are now filled in. So
Thank
you
you.
can kind of get a sense of where we're at, and I think we went over a few revenue updates last week, so feel free to look at that and let me know if you have questions.
Well, at least on the Berlin-Boylston Regional, we know the number isn't final until those two sort of significant questions get answered, yeah. So.
Yeah, and I think we'll have to stay on, asking the school district for final refinancing numbers too. So I'll keep that in mind and remember to do that.
Well, also the approval on the healthcare.
Oh, when
because-
that, yes.
Yeah,
yes,
I mean,
that's big.
they're, yeah, it's interesting, but I think Assabet is pretty close to final, isn't it? Was that the sense? Yeah,
Think so, yeah.
Lynn's saying yes, okay. She doesn't even have to unmute, she's just nodding.
No, yeah.
Um,
Julie,
Well,
your
that's-
hand's up. Do you have a question? She's muted too.
Who is?
Julie's
Julie.
got a hand up and she's muted.
I'm
Not
not.
muted on my screen.
No, there she
Oh,
is.
there you are. I couldn't hear you.
Oh, no, I don't have my hand up. I'm not sure what.
Isn't
It
that her
happens,
little
it
hand up?
happens sometimes. It's the strangest thing.
Oh, okay. Because it's not on my side. That's really kind of funny. No.
Yeah, because I don't see it either. So that's it for our presentations, right, Margaret?
Is it? That is, unless you need to call anybody back for follow-ups. I think, is that right? Am I right? Wait, let me check. That is it.
Yeah, I think we need to get into our nuts and bolts next week.
There you go.
Are we expecting anything coming back from Dennis Farabee regarding I thought he was going to get more numbers together on the software, proposals and all that type of stuff.
Yeah, let me follow up with him. He has, and I'm gonna get you all the preliminary draft town meeting warrant that the board has in their hands too, so you can at least start looking at what may or may not appear. Yes, I'll follow up with Dennis and to get you more info on that, on the one-time upfront costs.
Margaret, I have a question, and I don't know if this is FinCom related, but the other night, or was it, I think it was conservation, that the Tolman property was bought, or one piece was bought. I thought
Mhm.
that was under tax title, and that's
Oh,
why-
yeah, so any purchase of tax title property, the purchaser, they have to resolve the tax issues. So that means, and that's only the small, I think it's a 0.6 acre, the 0.6 acre piece where there is a railroad.
Okay, so we'll get
easement.
tax money, and not a lot. I just was curious if that
Yeah.
tax money comes back to the town.
Yeah, the tax money would have to be paid and that would be general fund revenue. Mhm.
Margaret, I'm totally forgetting which department, but didn't somebody else mention that they needed to upgrade software? It wasn't Dennis, it was before Dennis.
Assessors, wasn't it assessors?
Assessors, yes.
Yes, assessors. Now, they were talking about their personal property software vendor, and I can follow up with Molly on that.
Mm-hmm.
Was the same as June, right? They're gonna stay the same vendor, is it not?
That's Dennis's.
Dennis is.
Dennis is-
Okay.
Tax collection software would work, it's Vadar software, it would work in harmony, so they could actually reconcile, it'll be more streamlined. Molly's though is a personal property vendor software, that would not be Vadar, so let me check with Molly to see if she has additional details on that.
Because one of the things, and I think it came from listening to Dennis talk about their issues as well, is if Molly could find out how that's impacting their ability to collect revenue, like being able, because with the software, I mean, one of the big questions is it just nicer to have a shiny new
Yeah.
software package, or are they actually being handicapped or facing what Dennis is facing with the current vendor isn't really updating? That was one of the things Dennis brought up, that his current vendor, they're not really updating to the software.
Yeah, no, they're a DOS-based system and they really are
Yeah.
phasing out at this point, yeah.
Yeah.
Those are questions that I can ask both of them. It's clear, I'm clear, I think, on the Vadar,
Yeah.
on the point to Vadar conversion, the tax collections conversion,
Mhm.
that going to Vadar is going to streamline their functions and
Yeah.
it's going to streamline the reconciliation. So I think there's a real benefit there. I can't answer that question because I don't know on the
Yeah.
personal property tax software. So
I just think going forward, and I said I'm biased because I work with software all the time, and we just have to think about this all the time. Being able for the people who are using it to be able to articulate, this is the pain that we're having, this is the impact it's going to have on us.
yeah.
Because even if we can't do it this year, to have that in the pipeline, like to know, and I guess I don't know, like at this point, if we're getting into something that's more like a capital planning type of question. But the worst thing to deal with is if you have to change software at an inopportune time.
Uh-huh. Exactly.
Julie, there's never a good time to change your software when you use it.
No, there isn't, but there are
There's
particularly bad
never a good
times.
time, never.
But if you could plan for it, if you could say, oh, this is what it's going to be like, I think it would make it easier for them. And I think also easier for the folks who are asking.
Yeah, absolutely. Would finance like to have both of them attend your meeting next week to answer those questions, or do you want me to just convey what their feedback is? What's your preference?
Well, I think we're gonna have our work cut out for us going through the nuts and bolts, so
Okay,
I think we
okay,
should,
so-
if you could get them to convey and then just
Yep.
report, that would
Yeah.
be
Okay, got it.
helpful.
Okay.
All right, does anyone have anything else for tonight?
Not I.
Motion to adjourn.
Thank you, Janet.
All right, folks. Well, thank you, and thank you, Lynn.